Good morning, everyone. My name is Yvonne Lee, and I am the community guide at DICE. And today is the first of a series of Hangouts we're doing with an organization called Cloud Now, the Cloud Network of Women. Today we're going to talk about the risks involved with moving your enterprise to the cloud. And Mary Beth is going to serve both as a panelist and our moderator. So perhaps you guys could all introduce yourselves. Lori, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm the Senior Product Manager at F5 Networks, and I focus on emerging technologies, so cloud, DevOps, SDN, all those new things that are coming out. And I'm also the community guide for cloud for DICE. So I'm tracking a lot of activity in the cloud space, and risk is always just an interesting topic around that because it seems to be something that's impeding it right now. So lots of things to talk about there.
Okay, and Seema?
Hi, I am the Senior Product Manager at Dell. Joined Dell through an acquisition called Instratus, where I was the product manager for our multi-cloud manager product. Prior to Instratus, I was working at IBM as the strategist for cloud computing. So I've got quite a bit of background in the cloud space. And as Lori mentioned, that one of the key things in cloud, when people move to cloud, is the risk involved in moving to cloud. And so this is an interesting topic to be talking about today.
And so your colleague is also here. David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. So I'm David Mortman. I'm the Chief Security Architect for the Multi-Cloud Manager product at Dell. Like Seema, I joined Dell through the Instratus acquisition. I've been doing cloud stuff in one way or the other for the past 4 or so years, and I've been doing security going on 18, 19 years now. So that means security, risk, compliance, privacy, it all mushes together in one big pile at some point or another. So that's why I'm here.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And Mary Beth joins us from 11 Canterbury. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can begin. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks, Yvonne, and thanks to the DICE community for hosting our kickoff Cloud Now and DICE community meetups. We're looking forward to them. My name is Mary Beth Borving, and I am the Senior Advisor at 11 Canterbury, and I wear several hats. I'm also the East Coast Director for Cloud Now, which is a cloud network of women where we're reaching out and developing an understanding and partnerships within enterprise and cloud users and folks who want to migrate to the cloud. So my background is in risk and insurance. I've been in the insurance world for the last 15 years, and before that I was a chief financial officer of security and technology companies, and raising money from the venture markets and bringing them through fruition so they get their products out to the market. So I have been very involved in the risk side of business and how business take their journey to the cloud and what it means to the enterprise and to the business. And so I thought today we could talk about, when a company's going to pack their suitcase and say, it's time. We're not being competitive by the folks that are migrating to the cloud. In 2015, most enterprises will have a cloud presence and maybe even a separate company that they're using to operate in the cloud environment, and we better get there. So we've been trying to help people at Cloud Now to figure out what those risks are and keep them current, because they're going to be constantly changing. So security and transparency, I'm sure some of our panel can talk about that today. What does it mean to have security and transparency as you migrate to the cloud? So maybe, I don't know if you want to start, Seema or Lori or somebody chime in, and maybe we can make comments about what a company today should put in their suitcase when they look at what tools they're going to need as they go to the enterprise. They're going to have, what partnerships should they be developing, and how should they create a strategy? So Seema, Lori, do you want to jump in?
I'll jump in first. Okay. I think, before you can say, well, what tools do I need to have in my suitcase, you have to understand what it is that your application is going to need. What are you going to move out there, and what's important about it? Is it is it carrying very sensitive data? If that's the case, then you're going to need a different tool set than if your biggest risk in moving to the cloud is that it might go down and you'd lose revenue. Those are two very different risk factors, and you have to understand the application that you're moving before you can start picking up tools or forming partnerships. So you really have to understand what you're moving out there and what the risks are associated with that application before you can pick tools.
Okay, so maybe Seema, you can tell us. So if your application is let's say you have employee records, or you're a hospital and you want to operate in the cloud, and you have secure electronic medical records. So we talk about this need to know the application, but what should they be doing with that application? But also, how should they be viewing the data that they want to put in the cloud? Is some data not right for the cloud, or how do you
right.
develop that, Seema?
So some of the applications, you're right, a lot of this is governed by, okay, what application you want to move to the cloud, but also the data that goes along with the application. And there are regulations around these applications, and David can talk a little bit more about the regulations, but your data is governed by these regulations, and once you've determined that what regulation applies to what data, you can have a plan which says that, okay, this is data that I need to keep within my own enterprise, with behind my firewalls, or within this country, or whatever, and this is the data that's okay to have in a public cloud. And then you can have applications that span across these clouds. And there are connectors that work with keeping some of your data in your own enterprise and some of it in the cloud, and it can give you a view across that as well. David, do you want to talk a little bit more about regulations?
Sure, Seema. I think you hit on a key point there, which is you use the word public cloud. So people talk about cloud, and inevitably what they really are talking about is public cloud, but there's plenty of ways you can be doing cloud-like computing within the confines of your enterprise or in a shared space if you're in a community cloud type of environment. So saying whether you can't put something in the cloud doesn't really make a lot of sense without the context of what kind of cloud you're talking about and what kind of data it is. The regulations, for instance, around, if you're a government agency, whether you can put data in a cloud environment, whether it's a private cloud or not, is heavily controlled by things like FEMA and FedRAMP. So just being able to say that, well, it's if it's above FEMA moderate, then you run into all sorts of interesting issues about what kinds of computers you can put them on without worrying about who the provider is at all. Like, there's actually restrictions on the types of systems you can put them on. But, for those of us who aren't in the government space, it's going to be heavily impacted what you can do, what tools you need on the regulations, whether it's government or industry-specific ones that will impact how and the ways you might use cloud, or what restrictions you have around that.
So, David, if we're not governed by FedRAMP, if we're not a government contractor, or we're not a government agency and being restricted by that, and if we don't have to follow FEMA, maybe we should just back up and discuss, if you're going to move applications and you're going to, in those applications, move data to the cloud, should you start in a private cloud, or should you go to a public cloud, or do you go to a hybrid? Maybe all of you could comment on what's your suggestions for a company to start if they haven't had a presence yet in any kind of using cloud applications, or doing business in the cloud, because they are going to be concerned about their revenue and about their operations and security. Maybe make some comments about what type of cloud they should go to first.
Well, frankly, I think it really depends on the organization. I'm an analyst part-time, and frankly, that's not going to be the classic analyst answer, which is it depends.
Yes.
I think for most organizations, it's going to depend so much on what their available resources are in terms, managing a private cloud is no small feat. Most organizations do not have the IT or operation resources to build a private cloud and use it any more effectively than their non-cloud resources. If an organization is saying, hey, I want to start using, taking advantage of this cloud-like functionality, I would encourage them to build take advantage of a public cloud provider, like Amazon or Rackspace or Google, and use this as a proof of concept. Don't go throwing out a key application as your first move to the cloud. Start building some test environments. Get used to the space, just like with any other technology.
Yeah. So you're saying that people may feel more secure. Companies may feel more secure with keeping their information in a private cloud, but it may be more expensive and it may not be efficient, and it still may not be any more secure than a hybrid or a public cloud. It depends on the application you're running. And let's say you're working with ADP and you're running your payroll. I think ADP's been in the cloud for many, many years. So how does a company understand that their data may already be in some kind of a hybrid cloud, and what do they do to maybe put some compliance and regulation across that? Maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe all of us already know that our companies are doing business with some applications, but we're not maybe in control of knowing about everything that's going on in the cloud. So how do you create a framework that will help everyone understand where they are today with what applications they may already be running in the cloud, and decide, how they take those steps? Maybe everybody can comment on that.
I'm going to jump in here, but I think a dirty little secret about the cloud that no one likes to talk about, especially about public cloud, is just another outsourcing arrangement.
Right.
I mean, really, that's all it is. We have frameworks within companies for dealing with outsourcers. One of the big differences is that when you go to a traditional outsource arrangement, you have a lot of space for contract negotiations, for putting certain things in the contracts. You're not going to get that unless you're spending millions of dollars with a cloud provider. They're not going to, they're going to say, here's our default agreement. You can use it, or you can feel free to do business with somebody else. So you're not going to necessarily get all the same, controls you're used to at the contractual level. But that's something you can work around if you need to. And I'm sure Lori has some feelings on that.
Yeah, Lori, would you like to comment? And
Yes. That's there's a whole lot of checking on what you can deploy too in the cloud, right? There may be a lot of security options that you already have that you can duplicate in a cloud environment to obviate a lot of the risk that comes from it being just an outsourced provider who is it's commoditized. Everybody gets the same level of service. There's no guarantees. You may have to employ other techniques, find those tools that can also be deployed in the cloud and do it yourself in those cases if you can. In other cases where you were talking about like ADP and everybody's used, they use the example of Salesforce, and there's Concur and Ceridian, and there's all these SaaS applications out there that companies use that already involve a lot of risk because you have employees accessing them. They've got access to sensitive data. How do you control that? All right, there's a lot of process work that has to go on where you have to start talking to these companies, and they're already providing ways for you to go, okay, we're going to give you some control back so that you have better control over who has access, when, make that process easier. You've got to work with a lot of different, I guess, tools, right, from actual products that you deploy in the cloud to processes and integration in order to get a lot of that risk mitigated as you evolve and start getting more familiar with different cloud environments you're using.
Okay, that's great. Seema, did you want to comment?
Yeah, as David talked about earlier, and then you mentioned too, is that we already use a lot of cloud services, right? And so understanding that, okay, we have what applications and data do we already have in the cloud, email, payroll, all of that, and then what are we trying to protect? And then is it what is it worth protecting versus the cost of protecting it. Like we may think that, okay, cloud is insecure, we want to protect all of this data. At what cost does it come, right? And is that something that we want to put out versus leveraging the services that are there? And understanding the contracts that these cloud providers have in terms of, here is what we provide and this is our service level agreement, and is that something acceptable? Or do we want to spend more money and go to another provider that meets our needs? What is the trade-offs that we wanna do? I think understanding the cost is the key thing. Is that building a private cloud is not cheap, but then public clouds may have outages that may also be expensive that we have to deal with.
Okay. So we've talked about the applications. We've talked about companies that are maybe unknowingly or knowingly, they're already using cloud services. We've talked about the regulatory and compliance issues with the federal government being in the cloud itself and using guidelines like FedRAMP and FEMA. And we all know that our auditors and our lawyers are always looking at contracts. And if we say that moving to the cloud is really an outsourced arrangement managed by a contract, it's managed by a service level agreement at most levels. So can we talk about maybe what's changing in the service level agreement, and is there becoming more transparency around the security and potentially what is the partnership that's being formed in that service level agreement between the cloud user and the cloud provider? Does the cloud provider have to give us more information now because there's guidance from the SEC about major breaches and major outages that could be done when somebody's outsourced in a hybrid or a public cloud? Could we talk about what needs to go forward over the next couple of years, what you think is going to happen and what's maybe happening now with that service level agreement? And we all know that large companies were taking project type work and building, taking servers in Amazon, and maybe companies didn't know about it, and they were already having data in the cloud that they didn't know about. So with all of that sort of a known fact, can we talk about what has to happen to accelerate the people taking their assets to the cloud and doing business? Can we focus a little bit on the service level agreement and what that's going to mean to the partnership? I'd love to hear from everyone. Who wants to go first?
Nobody ever wants to jump in first.
I know.
Okay, I'll be first. I was just thinking about this, about whose responsibility is it that for all of the security, right? Mm-hmm. You talk about security, and we say that as some kind of a blanket, but there's really many different levels of security. A couple of years ago, there were a lot of pretty in-your-face outages that were caused by network attacks against different providers, and we won't go into that, but they've learned from that and they're protecting against that, and that's kind of part of the service level agreement. You expect that because they manage the infrastructure, the network, the switches, the incoming pipes, that they are going to be responsible for protecting that against these attacks. But as you continue to move up the stack, when you build an application, it's not really viable to say you're also responsible for protecting my application against my poor coding, or that I forgot to protect it against X or Y or Z. So there's a split here. When people talk about cloud security, there is a shared responsibility, and there's a natural split. And maybe the SLAs need to spell that out, that at some point it becomes, this is wholly yours, this is ours, and we'll work together in order to kind of meet any in the middle that we need to provide services for or offer you more options.
So, Lori, you're talking about the performance level, the service level of performance in that service level agreement in some ways.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. Right.
I think people have come to expect that there will be failures in the cloud, mostly from a performance aspect, but I don't think that people expect like security breaches yet from their cloud providers. That would be really bad. So so in terms of outages, yes, we understand that, you know, that may happen. We need to build our application so that it can deal with those outages. But when it comes to security, if my infrastructure is open, I'm you know, it's not something that is acceptable, right? So so when we look at providers, we also need to be able to say that how are you going to provide me controls that will help protect the infrastructure, but then how my application, I need to protect that. So Lori is right in terms of there being that that, you know, separation of responsibilities. But that doesn't mean that we expect our providers to not give us the controls or not protect themselves and hence us from security breaches.
Can you give us an example of controls that they should be providing? Just an example.
Right. So let's say we use infrastructure as a service. The providers give us machines to use. So the ability to configure the machines, this is very basic, and David can add a bit more, but configuring firewalls, restricting ports, stuff like that. David, do you want to add more on types of controls?
So the responsibility depends on the type of application or the type of process that's being served in the cloud, whether it's infrastructure as a service, software as a service.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So if it's a platform, then there'll be different kinds of controls. But for infrastructure, and firewall is an example.
Right. David, when you give us your take on.
No. Right, so I think there's two things going on here. One is SLAs, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The separate is, where do the lines of responsibility lie when you're dealing with a cloud or any other outsourcing agreement with regards to anything, security, operations, performance. Somewhere along the way there's a line. So Amazon actually does a really good job of making it clear. They say, we're responsible for the physical security of the site. We're responsible for the security of the hypervisor, making sure it's patched. We give you an operating system that you launch an EC2. Anything once you have the operating system in hand, you are fully responsible for configuration management, patch management, securing that operating system and any applications you put on top of that. If you look at a platform as a service provider, they generally provide the security of the platform as a service and everything below that, so the underlying operating systems and networks and things like that. But you're expected to maintain the security of your actual application, write good, clean code, and things like that. And if you move up the stack to something like a software as a service platform, you're expected to make sure that you're giving users within that application the appropriate authorizations, but the SaaS provider is maintaining responsibility for the quality of their code that they're writing and things like that. So that's going to shift up and down the stack, and it's going to vary slightly from provider to provider. On a separate issue are these SLAs. Frankly, in the cloud, I feel like SLAs are an illusion. They don't really mean anything. And I'm going to put on Amazon not because I think badly of them, but because there's a great example where whatever it was 2-3 years ago, they had a massive outage in their eastern region. It was enormous. People had systems down for 3, 4, 5, in some cases upwards of 10 days. They had instances down. Amazon took all of their customers and said, we're going to give you 10 free days of service because of this outage. They didn't have to according to their SLA. They didn't miss a single SLA check as a result of the outage, given the way their SLAs were written. They had no legal obligation under their own contracts to actually provide any compensation for that outage. So that's one thing. The other thing is that in the cloud space, your traditional outsourcer, you have all sorts of responsibilities around SLAs, and with a smaller provider, you can actually own them if they give you a big enough outage. You can basically say, you owe me not just for the cost I would have paid you, but for all the business I've lost. That's a typical outsourcing agreement if you're a big company. You go to Amazon or Rackspace or anyone, they say the SLA says, if we miss the SLA, oh, and by the way, you have to tell us we missed the SLA. We're not going to proactively tell you that. We will reimburse you for the amount you would have spent with us, the amount you spent with us during that window. And frankly, if I'm down for 3 days because I did a poor application architecture and Amazon went down for 3 days, okay, they might give me back, my $800. That's not going to help me with my thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost business. I mean, you don't really think that Netflix, who spends millions of dollars with Amazon, cares about the SLAs? They don't trust them at all. They have their own internal SLAs that they write that their applications need to maintain, and they architect their application to deal with any issues that might come up regardless of the provider's SLAs.
So what you're saying, David, is there's a stacking issue on the SLAs, just like there's a stacking issue in the applications and the way the infrastructure is run. It depends on how the responsibility is going to get shared. But if we look at the understanding of, okay, so an application was written poorly, but what about those instances where a customer's brand's at risk? Okay, maybe it's not Netflix, although Netflix sometimes is down quite a bit if you're a movie watcher. So their brand is going to get damaged because they're down for those 10 days that the Washington, D.C. area was down for, and so they reimburse them for the 999 uptime that they guarantee, in their calculation of how they run their service level agreement. But beyond that, there's that gap in the way somebody does their business and the way the service level agreement sort of sets the tone for the partnership. So how do what remedies could happen? I mean, I've heard, been doing some work on an extended service warranty beyond the service level agreement that the cloud user would buy, so that if there was a natural disaster, if there's a telco problem, a telco can't get into the data center to run the data center, or if there's a natural disaster like Superstorm Sandy, when everybody was down and there was people were flooding and there was a dike that broke and nobody could fix it. So, but they were still down, and their brand was, they were folks that were using some of the cloud services, their brand was being affected. Maybe we can comment on that, because there's risk, and it maybe goes beyond what Amazon can provide, and the service they're providing is cheap compared to maybe the value of the assets they're running in the cloud, and also the brand that they have out to their customers. Maybe there's, how can we maybe look at providing more substance around that relationship?
Well, reputation risk, at least in terms of security, is not nearly as malleable as a lot of security people would like the world to think. The number of businesses that have lost long-term value due to a security breach, I can name one company.
Mm-hmm.
TJ Maxx, they weren't based in the cloud, but they had a major security breach. Their stock is up. The one company I can think of is Pay by Touch, and they're out of business because the credit card companies cut them off. They were a credit card processor, and they basically got cut off, and all the credit card processors say, "You were so egregious, we're not doing business with you anymore." And so their market went away, not because their customers went away, but because the providers said, pound salt.
Maybe go beyond the cybersecurity breaches, because we know the cloud's done a pretty good job at managing those, but maybe the things that are beyond our control, as we say in the insurance business, the natural disasters, a regional telco is down, and it's not Amazon's fault, it's not Microsoft's fault, and it's not the service isn't still being delivered that's being housed in the cloud. So
that comes down, and I think Lori will probably agree with me here, this comes down to an application architecture problem more than anything else. If your business is so important that a thing like Superstorm Sandy is going to take it out, you better have an application architected that can easily fail over to another data center, to like a West Coast facility or an alternate cloud provider, or already be spanning multiple cloud providers, so that way when things drop out, you're still in business.
So there is no disaster; it's an advantage then if you're architected your cloud correctly, you'll be able to run your business versus someone that's not in the cloud. Is that kind of?
Well, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that it's running in one data center.
Yeah.
If you have a critical application, running in one data center is ridiculous, regardless of the underlying technology. It has nothing to do with cloud, or private cloud, or hybrid cloud, or bare metal in a data center. it's just poor application network architecture to to have a single point of failure like that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with David. I mean, cloud doesn't obviate the need for dual data centers, right? You've been in insurance, right? That it's very typical for an insurance company to have 2 different data centers and to test at least once a year, right? A complete failover. We were destroyed by a tornado, so we have to fail over to this other site. And to do things like that. Cloud doesn't obviate the need for redundant data centers or maybe global data centers. In fact, cloud was billed as being the more affordable alternative to a second data center. So it was actually initially people really pushed it as, here's your business continuity solution. Use the cloud. It's perfect. So if you're going to put an app in the cloud, it better be somewhere else as well, in another cloud, in another availability zone. You're still going to need to have some kind of a disaster recovery plan, whether you're using the cloud or not.
So I agree with you, Lori. So I've talked to a lot of the insurance companies actually that were affected by Superstorm Sandy, and they're in the cloud, but they still couldn't operate because I don't think, and they have data recovery exercises that they ran, but what happened was that the business continuity and the data and the disaster recovery plan wasn't strong enough to go for that many days because they maybe didn't have enough people in other regions that could run and manage the data, and so they still saw ways that they still had problems. They were down, okay, and now even when they do their disaster recovery plan, they said they have to plan so that people are so dispersed that some companies, even with thousands of employees, they don't have enough people that have the expertise. So they go back to that telco issue, whereas if the power is down, even in one region, it may be affecting maybe their data centers up, but they can't still operate. So they're really, I know they're really struggling with this problem, and there's been a lot of actually federal funding to actually help companies in because of Superstorm Sandy. They're trying to help them design better disaster recovery plans, and that's a big push. So I guess what you're saying is you got to have what you and David were talking about, but you also have to have a great disaster recovery plan. So. Well, thank you. So does anybody like to comment on something that they're working on that's sort of magnanimous to the cloud and maybe give people a forward-thinking look at what's going on? I think it's always good to make predictions when we have so many evangelists on the phone.
I think security and risk have been, the main concerns for people moving to cloud, and we've seen that over the past few years. But we've been making a lot of progress, and people are getting more comfortable with using cloud services, planning for failure, designing better applications, because ultimately it comes down to what does it cost me, what is my revenue, what's my profit, right? And so I think that as we move into 2014, we are going to, all the analysts will tell you, cloud is going to reach this much revenue. So definitely we're going to move past this concern, and you're going to see wider adoption. That's not, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, that's great, Seema. So 2014, there's going to be further migration. People have packed their suitcase. We're all doing each other in the cloud. Okay, and maybe Lori. So when we get there, what are we going to do for our applications, and what should we be looking at to go forward?
Well, I think one of the things that's been happening as, we've gotten greater adoption, it's not, full steam, but it's definitely pushing ahead. And as more companies are being mandated to move to the cloud and they want to go to the cloud, they see these risks. And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, the cloud doesn't have all of the same options and services and tools that we have in the enterprise. And so they're pushing on both the cloud providers and then the vendor community in general and saying, we need these tools available in the cloud. So, we've been seeing a lot of price wars right now as the providers try to differentiate, But I think moving forward, as we see more adoption and more people trying to push out there, that there's going to be a lot more push on getting more tools in those clouds so that people can start picking and choosing and building better, systems in order to deal with the different types of risks that are out there. So hopefully in the next year we'll start seeing more and more options out there as the cloud providers say, we can't go any lower on our prices unless we give it away. So we have to do something. And one way to do that is to start really pushing on and deploying different types of services that are going to address these concerns that people have about cloud. Try to attract them that way.
So Laura, you're saying maybe it's not going to be just migration for price. It's going to be for efficiency and maybe for better performance because there's going to be more options available. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's going to be more about those different types of value-added services than it will be price eventually. You can only go so low.
Right. Okay, great. All right, so David, I want to hear from you. What do you think?
I'm with Lori. I think pricing sort of gets people's attention, but the operational agility you get from migrating to the cloud, the ability to accelerate how quickly you get applications deployed, upgraded, configured, that is where cloud becomes supremely powerful. Cost is great, but it also gives you the opportunity as an organization to upgrade your employees, if you will, from being people rack mounting machines to people who are doing deep systems administration, application development, things like that. So you can move everyone up the stack, verbally speaking. It makes all your employees a lot more effective and a lot more, it makes your workforce incredibly powerful. This makes you as a company a lot more able to produce what your customer needs.
That's great. Yeah, so, 2014, I'm hoping that just like every other place and people when they do business in their enterprise, they get to have some kind of a third party that can help them with losses or reputational risk and brand and uptime, the consequences of an outage or business continuity. That we're hoping that there will be an insurance product like an extended service warranty that actually almost like sleep insurance, I'm going to call it, so that people know that they can do business in the cloud and the risk of not being made financially whole will be reduced. So we are working on that, and I do see that coming. It's not if, it's when, because I think cloud is the new real estate. So, everybody's going there, and it's going to be where everyone's assets are. And so if we look forward and say, the benefits of that are that we're going to actually have a more efficient companies, and McKinsey thinks that people with big brands, big box brands, will be really setting up separate companies so that they're more nimble and they can compete with more of the so-called internet companies. So there's going to be a migration. And so it's a brave new world in the cloud. So pack your suitcase. So, well, thank you all very much. Oh, sorry, Sina.
No, I was just saying, I think a new insurance product is a really neat idea, and looking forward to hearing more about that from you.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. Yvonne, thank you for having us. Dice community, we hope that maybe we can get some comments going from our on-the-air discussion. So we look forward to it. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.